what's happening in terms of feminism and a new wave of feminism in your country? Is there a lot going on? Are groups forming? What are the major issues? Are they seeing gender identity legislation as an important issue, or are there other things that are much more important that they're concentrated on? So is there any support for those few of you, I don't know how many, and indeed how many, are working on gender identity in your country? Are you having a revival of feminism as we are here? And so is there a sort of a wave of feminism happening? And are those new feminists, if you are having that, concerned about gender identity, or are there other issues they're concentrating on?
No, actually, we don't have this huge movement in Argentina like you have. Definitely, we don't. We are starting to have it. We are trying to move it away. But the situation in our country is that we have a kind of fourth wave, we can say, a very massive wave, at least two huge collectives of feminism, which is María Verde about abortion law, which is, we don't have abortion yet, but we have the Recognition Act, ID Act. But probably abortion will be this year, will be real in our country this year. We have a second massive movement, which is Ni Una Menos, which is also an iconic movement in our country. Ni Una Menos is no one less, no one less. But this collective movement, Ni Una Menos, started to be a feminist wave, but now it's a non-governmental organization. So now Ni Una Menos is a profitable organization at the expense of women. And this profitable organization is not feminist, but trans-feminist, actually. It is a pimp organization promoting sexual work and working together with some pimp unions here in the country, and unions of sexual workers and, well, pimp stuff. So now Ni Una Menos became a kind of profitable trans-feminist movement. So that is the huge movement, collective movement here in the country. And now the situation is very, very tensioned because, for example, we have another iconic event in the country, which is the National Encounter of Women, which is one year we have this encounter. The encounter this year will be the 35 years of the encounter. But now we have two names for that encounter. We have the National Women Meeting, and we have the Plurinational Women and Diversity Meeting. So we have two names for the same event, and that is on the limit of the break. I mean, this year probably it will happen a break because it's not, it's no more tenable, these two names for a same event. So the situation is coming, slowly is coming, more and more contradictory and more tense.
Situation here is pretty bad, you know, because feminism here and progressive women that do not call themselves feminists but work with women on women issues, they are very connected to left parties, and so usually they do not want, even when they are not affiliated to these parties, they do not want to publicly complain of the left party because they do not want to be compared with conservatives, etc. So it's almost impossible to discuss gender identity here. Left parties, they are very, very colonized by trans and pink lobbies here. It's just horrible. We have this radical feminist, Eloisa, and she was almost forced to get out of her party, PSOL, a left party, because she's a radical feminist. You know, she was like forced to quit, so it's almost being expelled here. And the trans activists here, they're very aggressive. They scream with us on meetings, and I'm not only active online, but I do go to meetings, to live meetings. I go to the meetings to the 8M every year, and they're very, very aggressive. So situation here it's pretty bad. Plus, our academia was very colonized by queer theory, just like other countries. We did have brilliant women talking about women. We did have women's studies here, and feminist studies here, and even real feminists on gender studies. But nowadays, it's very hard to talk about these issues, you know, without, you know, being called a bigot or transphobic. So situation here is very, and plus last year our Supreme Court said that homophobia and transphobia is a crime. Of course, wonderful that homophobia is a crime, but you know, this kind of transphobia becoming a crime, many people are always threatening us on, oh, I'm gonna go to the police, we'll go to jail. And so women are, it's very hard, the situation here.
In relation to feminism in Australia, I think it depends on who you're asking. So the liberal feminist narrative definitely dominates in the mainstream media. Very pro-prostitution, pro-porn, pro-choicey choice, cool girl feminism that very much dominates. There is a small but strong cohort of radical feminists, which is definitely growing. But we're definitely not as organised or mobilised as they are, say, maybe in the UK or Scotland. But I would say it's definitely growing. And we have some quite, like, domestic violence has been very much in the media and dominating the media. There was a really terrible family annihilation that occurred in January, where a young woman and her 3 children were intercepted on the school run, and her ex-partner tipped petrol on them and basically set them alight, and they all died. And it was a bit of a tipping point, because we had a lot of conversations around domestic violence for the last several years, when we had Australian of the Year, Rosie Batty, who also lost her son, who was murdered by her former partner in terrible circumstances. And she was a very prominent activist, but she had to step back from that because of the vitriol and the hatred that she was getting in social media. But it really brought it to the forefront. However, it was still being framed as a non-gendered issue and family violence. And with what happened to the young woman earlier this year, it really became apparent that we needed to acknowledge it as a gendered issue. But obviously Corona has happened, and that's now dominating the narrative. We've also got serious concerns around the decriminalisation of prostitution, which is happening everywhere in Australia. In the Northern Territory, they recently decriminalised it, and they have incredibly punitive laws up there that mean that effectively, from a legal perspective, the John can sue the prostituted woman for breach of contract if she doesn't perform in the way that they agreed. So that is being pushed forward by the supposed feminist activists for the pro-prostitution. So it's a really mixed message. I think in Australia we have really good laws to protect women in work, in terms of maternity leave. It could be better, but we have paid maternity leave through the government and so on. We recently had the abortion laws overturned in my state, and it was removed from the criminal code and put into just a standard legislation with the rules and regulations around it. However, at the last minute, they changed the wordage from women and females and replaced it with people. So it was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory where we're having this erasure of women in policy and legislation. So it's a little bit of one hand giveth and the other hand taketh away. So we have a lot of rights and privileges in this country, and I think overall we do really well. But at the same time, we do really badly in other ways. So yeah, so I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about how feminism is tracking in Australia. But I think with the radical feminism, it is growing, and around the gender ideology, if you move away from the academy or you move away from the feminist circles, the vast majority of people don't believe in it. In particular, sports was a tipping point, I think, because there was a number of prominent biological males who were competing in, say, women's AFL, which is a very high energy, high contact sport. And it looked ridiculous and women were becoming injured. So the ordinary person is not on board with it, but because you have these people in control of policy and legislation and implementing the Denton strategy that Kate brought up, where they do it without media scrutiny and they do it behind closed doors, and they have legislation pre-written that they present to the government, which is then enacted into legislation, which I found some evidence of around the Sex Discrimination Act. You know, because this is all happening and then presented to us as a fait accompli, we don't have a right of reply. Like with the changes in the Sex Discrimination Act, when gender identity was inserted, I looked through all the reports handed up by the Senate and the House of Representatives, and there was no mention of the impact on women, none. It was all to do with pro-trans ideology, piggybacking off LGB rights. And also, like with the policy changes, I think there's a lot of fear of politicians being seen to be without same-sex marriage debate that we had here recently. We were behind a lot of other developed countries, and it was a very toxic debate, and I think people are afraid of being seen as being phobic. So they're jumping on board with pushing through this policy without any due diligence or consultation with the communities.
We are fortunate to have actually a good lineage of radical feminists, you know, since the 1980s, and some feminists were opposing gender ideology, you know, in the 1990s when it wasn't even introduced like this in all countries. But then there was some kind of stopping of everything about any mentioning of the debate in like 2000s, and then we got a liberal government and they introduced the gender identity into the law. But then unfortunately all radical feminists completely retreat from public engagement, and there was a time when there wasn't any radical feminism visible in public space. So when we found FemRevolt, we were the first ones. It was in 2014. We were the first ones to openly debate gender ideology in public and as an informal organization, feminist. And also we are at this point the only openly radical feminist organization on the territory of all ex-Yugoslavia. So since 2014, I think we gained some public space. We have a Facebook page which has like almost 7,000 followers, and we managed to create our web portal where we put our text, where we translate to Croatian and Serbian language text from other feminists, radical feminists from the US or UK, it doesn't matter. And after we published the declaration on women's sex-based rights, I have to say we have much more, how should I say, we have much more attention from the trans lobby than we had before, because before we weren't seen as some serious players, but since we published declaration, all of a sudden they start to see us as political factors, and since then they published like 4 articles against us. The thing in Croatia is because you know, we have conservative government and so little trans persons. The whole debate is very academic, and that's why we are trying to provide the answers in academic spaces and more in theoretical debates than because just, you know, ordinary woman does not. This is a very abstract debate here. When we put something about trans issues on our page, you know, we only have like 20 likes. People just don't see it as something serious, you know. So we have to always contextualize with other things like prostitution, like violence against women, and all this story to be able to get the message to wider population. But regarding the trans issue, the debate is very academic and very in this very closed circles. And I have to also say that what the good thing is about Croatia is that we have actually a lot of support from all the feminists that are now in NGOs, different kind of NGOs. So most of them, they can speak publicly against trans issue because they could lose some funding and stuff, but they rely on us to be the spokespersons, but they always offer us help in organizing and with money and stuff. So I'm very satisfied actually with how things go, and having this kind of connection with feminists from all the world. I think this is going to be even better with time.
Well, in Spain, we are at least at the language, at the level language, I think we appear to be more advanced than other countries, because, for instance, surrogacy is not called that way here in Spain. It's called rente bellis. That's the expression the activists use in order to highlight that it was the exploitation of the body of women. So the fight against surrogacy is quite advanced in that sense. I don't think there are feminists that are rooting for it, but the lobby, the clinical, medical, and anyone that could have a profit from it. In terms of prostitution, there is a divide, but the abolitionist movement is very, very strong, and it's gaining really. It's gaining terrain, in the sense that even there was one of our regions, the president of that region last month, for March the 8th, day of International Women's Day, that president of the region, sort of a governor in the United States or a president of a lander in Germany, he endorsed an abolitionist event and declared that region to be abolitionist. That's on the surface, but really still on every road there are houses that sell women in that sense, and Spain has a huge problem with prostitution, because I think we are one of the countries in where Jones are really exploiting women. I mean, in numbers, we are like second or third country in the world, behind, I don't know, Thailand and some other. So here is a huge problem. That's also why there's a strong movement against prostitution from the abolitionist point of view, and the idea is to have a Nordic model here in Spain. As for gender, it's what I was telling before about replying to that other woman. The issue is not very well known here. So it is gaining some awareness, but the radical feminists that are speaking against gender are also divided, because some want to be the purest of the radicals, and they want to get rid of every piece of legislation that allows anyone to change their sex legally. Now, Spain, we have a legislation in which some people, provided they have medical certificates and provided that they undergo hormonal treatment and all that, they, if proven to also that they don't have any mental health issue that is really influencing that distress that they have, they can change their legal sex in their sorry, someone was asking me a question in the chat and I got distracted. Sorry, I will answer later. Thank you. So, so there is that possibility, but since there are these measures for gatekeeping with the medical supervision and all that, so the numbers are not that high, and like I said, it's so far it hasn't been a political problem. The problem we are really watching now develop is the self-ID, as it is happening in every other country, because we are already having, I don't know, a person working on television claiming that he's a woman, no hormones, no treatment, nothing whatsoever. He has a girlfriend, but he has a ponytail, a blonde ponytail, because he goes to the hairdressers and has highlights on his hair and wears dresses. So that's the kind of situation that's beginning to be visible here in Spain. They are pushing very hard for self-ID and to enhance the limits of what is acceptable to claim your identity. So what I'm saying is that when women get awareness of what's going on, they don't like it. So far, with most of the feminists that I've been talking to, they don't like it. They didn't know about it. They were concerned that they didn't know about it. Why didn't we know about it? So I'm moderately optimistic, because on the one hand, we need to be very fast, because the government is pushing for that. And they have said that starting June, they will begin to develop this self-ID law in Spain. Maybe that will be delayed, because those statements were made before the epidemic, the pandemic. Maybe they will delay that, but they started in office in January, and at the end of January or in February, they were already talking about having this trans self-ID law.
We're incredibly lucky in many ways. When I listen to what's going on in Australia and how close they came to having jail sentences for clinicians who advise teenage children to have therapy rather than to have drugs and surgery, and I feel for you in Spain and Brazil and Croatia, and I think I don't know why we're luckier, but I think for some reason, and this can be analysed by historians, the anger of individual women has created a completely new wave of awareness of misogyny, and you know, we know Sheila's written books that lots of women have read, and it seems to have been sort of, there's been a period where it was relatively calm, and then 2015 came, Stonewall turned into a trans rights organisation. 2018 came with the gender recognition reform consultation. And the women of this country, from left to right, whatever they are, and we're going to come to cross-party activism, it's all about misogyny, and it's about women saying, we've had enough, we're not taking it anymore.